once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance. And I am Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist, the chair of BLM Tokyo. Tokyo.
That's a new country.
And the Proud Son. I was thinking ahead. I was thinking the Proud Son. So somehow I mixed up Tokyo and Son. There you go. What's going on, Jay?
Oh man, just and you mentioned Proud Son. That's what's going on. Being a proud son, So my mother was just on the Today Show and on CNN, actually on the same day. So she was put on. She was because she works with the International African American History Museum that's going to be opening up pretty soon, and she is like the head genealogist at the Center for Family History. And so she went on in her connection with that, and she did some genealogical background research on one of the hosts of, each one of the programs, and, helped them look into their history and their background. And even the guy on the Today Show, she made him cry. So,
Wow.
That was kind of.
This museum is in DC?
No, it's in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
So it's in Charleston, South Carolina, and they've got the museum on, I believe it's called Gadsden Wharf, and this was a place where it was a port where a lot of slave ships came into, and as much as 40%, maybe in that region, of slaves came in through that port. And so what they've basically done is kind of reclaim that space to tell the history, and they put the museum right there on that area. So wow. it's crazy. The museum should be opening up pretty soon, the next week or two.
Okay. Now, what is your role exactly with the museum?
So in the museum, they have, within the museum, they have the Center for Family History, which is going to be a program where people can come in. It's a part of the museum where people can go in and basically learn how to do some of this research. And you don't necessarily have to be, African American. It's like if you're looking to do genealogical research on your family history, you can come in and they've got programs that are going to be set up to help people learn how to do these things, where to go for resources and whatnot. And so she is the head genealogist in that regard, and she wrote the program to set up for this research and for helping people get their research going.
Okay. Yeah, I know your mom was into genealogy for a while, right?
Yeah, she's been in genealogy for, probably more than 30 years now. It actually started with my grandmother. My grandmother used to do the family tree back, a long time ago. And so she would do it based off of stories and histories that she would hear, that she heard from her grandmother. And so she remembered and wrote down these things, and she collected all this information, and she would go, back then there weren't computers and such, so she would have to go into local archives and into, libraries and that stuff and do everything manually. And so she was able to take it back several generations. And then my mother came on to help her out, and she got, I guess, bit by the bug, and she took it from there. And so she's been researching for years and was able to take back our family history like several hundred years on all different lines. Like, so for example, on one of the lines, we are descendants of the first person who stepped off of the Mayflower when it came to the United States, when it came to the New World, so to speak.
You said your family was one of the first? Wow.
Yeah, on one of the different lines, right? Because you got your paternal, you got your, maternal lines and whatnot. So one of the lines, we got that relation. I think we're 15th cousins of Barack Obama on one of the lines as well. That hasn't
It's funny because it seems like all of the presidents are related to each other, but I think everyone is just related to everyone, right? So you can be like, yeah, I'm 25th cousins with any name a president, right?
Yeah, if you go back far enough, absolutely. I mean, especially when you talk about everybody's coming out of the, everyone came from, what is it, mitochondrial Eve or Lucy from Africa. If you go that far back, we're all
exactly. We're all related. It's all incestuous over here.
but it's, it's putting names to these connections, right?
Yeah.
Who it was that was connected, this and that. And I think we're in one of the lines, we've got a connection with Charlemagne as well. Not Charlemagne the God.
Not Charlemagne the God. All right.
Right.
Not the donkey of the day.
Right. So, it's very interesting. So what she's done in that regard is not only taken on personal clients, but she's also done her lecturing, and she's also working with the University of Virginia, and she headed up their research department because they're doing research and discovering that basically not the museum, but the university was built by slave labor. Right. And a lot of universities were built by slave labor.
Were these slaves connected to Thomas Jefferson?
Some of them, I think, were. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're going through and now recognizing that history and recognizing those enslaved persons that worked on these, that were forced to build these universities and whatnot. So she's heading up that research with the university as well.
Wow.
So and at the same time, she's gotten with some other genealogists in the field of African American history, and about 10 years ago, they set up their own, call it the Midwest African American Genealogical Institute, called MAGGIE, where they do once a year, they do a course, and people sign up and they learn how to do genealogy, how to go to these records, learn about things like the Freedmen's Bureau, which had a lot of records of formerly enslaved persons, and they go through and they, take these courses with these different genealogists and whatnot. So she also heads that up as well. So she stays quite busy.
Yeah, and she was doing genealogy before it was cool, right? Now everyone's on Ancestry and all these sites and all, but she predates all of that. So she's the OG in that field.
Yeah. She was doing back then, when I remember when she was using Family Tree Maker, and she was using what was the other one? Ancestry.com. This is before they had the DNA test, and this was when it was new software. And so she was doing that type of stuff. And she's kind of known. Huh?
Before it was cool.
Yeah, before it was cool. Before there were TV shows and stuff out about it. But yeah, so that's what she does, and she's technically retired, so to speak, but she holds down these multiple jobs doing this stuff full time. So
you got to get her on here to talk more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So she's she stays busy. She does her thing. So I'm actually really, really proud of it, really happy. She speaks at conferences across the country. She writes articles for different publications in regards to genealogy. She's known in the community as Family Tree Girl. So it's good. I mean, unfortunately she got hacked a few months ago, and she lost her Twitter account. So some crypto douchebag has taken over her account, and
really?
Twitter under Elon Musk doesn't have their customer support in place, so nothing's being done and no one's responding to any contact. So that kind of sucks.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Something that isn't quite as cool, but I thought was interesting. Let me see if I have it here. Last week we were talking about contracts in the music business, and I just happened to come across my Rawkus contract from 2007.
Nice.
When I was actually getting books out of boxes from my new bookcases that I put together, I came across this contract randomly, and I thought it was pretty interesting, especially now as an attorney who can read these things like a lawyer could, right? Because back then, you don't know what this stuff really means when you get a contract. And I think that's part of the problem, right? Like, artists will get contracts. Of course, the advice is to have an attorney look it over for you, but still, you don't know what you're really looking at. I mean, you could read it before you sign it, but you don't really know what these words actually mean. And reading it now, it's very clearly drafted by a lawyer, right? The type of language that they're using here.
Right. And people always say that, you want to have a lawyer look it over, and it's an excellent advice. But as an independent artist, you may not have the money to have a lawyer look it over.
Right. And also, if you get a lawyer look it over, you're still just trusting what they say. You still don't really know what it means. Even if they try to explain things to you, kind of at other people's mercy, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you hope if you're hiring a lawyer, they've got some sort of integrity.
No, I know. But I'm just saying, like, you might still not be able to internalize it and understand it
Right.
Even if it's explained to you, like maybe they can break it down a little bit, but it's still going to be a bit over your head probably. Most likely, if an issue comes up, you're not going to know it well enough to be able to handle it. You got to go back to that lawyer, like, hey, what did you say about that thing again? What does clause 9 mean again? You know.
So let me ask you this. Now, looking at it as a lawyer and reading through it, is there anything in there that you think is problematic or would prevent you from signing it today?
No, and that's the thing that struck me, because I remember back then there were other artists who were offered this deal, and a couple of them turned it down because they said they had some questions about it, things seemed questionable about it, and they weren't trusting of it. But honestly, there's nothing here really that I would consider to be a negative. I mean, I retain exclusive rights to everything. All I'm doing really is giving them, for the period of this contract, the exclusive rights to the digital distribution of that one album. So I was still able to put out that album in the physical form, which I did, right? I could back then still sell your CDs, no problem. They couldn't touch any of that. And also any other music that I did. It wasn't like they owned everything that I was doing going forward. I was able to put out whatever I want. And that album, if you recall, I had already dropped. So it was a re-release. Right. So there was no downside for me. I was just giving them the rights to market and put out and make money off of an album digitally that I already released. But you know, there was no harm for me. Whatever I was giving up by doing that was greatly outweighed by the benefits. And there were benefits that a lot of people might have overlooked at the time. Just to be associated with that brand, Rawkus Records, allowed me access to hip hop wherever it manifested anywhere in the world, right? I remember going down to the DMV, they call it DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia, just meeting people in random places. Once they found out that I was working with Rawkus, I mean, they gave me free studio time. They wanted to work with me. They did shows with me. I can get on any stage. It was just like an all access pass to hip hop anywhere. Everyone just wanted to be around that. It's like your credibility. You know, you could use it to get into any room. And
to Rawkus's credit, they put money into marketing as well. I mean, there was the double XL spread with the name. Look at this. This is a funny thing you say that. Under the contract in the box was a random, I thought, episode. What do you call edition? Issue. Thank you. Issue of double XL. I'm like, why is there a random double XL here in this box? That's probably the spread from Rawkus. Yes.
So I thumbed through it, and here it is.
Yep. There it is. I remember that.
My name is this is not me. This is a model on this page here. This is the Rawkus.
That's what you used to look like before AI.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you guys can see the angle here. Can't get it right there.
Right. You're on the right hand column, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes. Right. Actually, it's funny. 2 under Mr. Metaphor. Mr. Metaphor, a friend of ours.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah. He was on the. That's it. And there's a bunch of guys on there that we know.
Let's see. Cy Martial Law is on here.
Silent Night's on there.
Silent Night. I was actually talking to him recently about doing some stuff. 6 Sense is on here. Yeah.
Right. 12-bit was on there.
Yep. He was the first one listed because of alphabetical order.
Yeah. 12-bit's on there.
Dutch Massive. Did we do a show with Dutch Massive? Or something?
I don't know. We did with Barack Yalad.
Barack Yalad came to our show that we did.
Right. So him and Mr. Metaphor came to our show.
BK is on here too.
BK was on there. Yep.
Yeah. Then you got a guy called Sonny or Sun NY. I think he was on 106 in Park with the freestyle battle.
Right.
There was also people on here. Let me see if I can find them. I did shows with them in Maryland, actually. And that was another example. Maybe it was custom made. There was a crew. There was a crew of artists. It might be custom made. But there was a crew of artists, and they were doing stuff in Maryland. They were really big in the area. See, what this Rawkus 50 campaign sought to do was sign artists to this deal who were kind of popping, who had a thing going all over the country, or maybe even internationally. And so you had people who were holding it down in their areas. And so that was something else. I mean, aside from just being able to associate with really anyone in the hip hop space, you especially had these different scenes going on where you had, for example, in Maryland, a crew of artists that were holding it down, doing shows, getting a buzz, having fans. And they were doing a show like every month, every few weeks, whatever it was. I just remember hitting them up like, hey, basically we're label mates right now. We're teammates on this. I'm in the area. why don't I get down on one of your shows? And I was like, like I said, open door, right? I can just get on the show and now I'm in front of all the air fans. So that really, I think, was a great look. I think a lot of people were skeptical of it because maybe it was overly ambitious in some ways. We were going to sign 50 artists at once and put them all out together. And you could certainly critique some of how it was done. But I think it was a great thing. And I'm very happy that I did it. I think if I would have turned it down like some did, I would be regretting it to this day.
Yeah. And it was, it was ambitious for the time, especially because streaming was kind of new at that point, and digital releases were starting to become the mainstay, and they were looking to make more like of a digital label, trying to do something new, to take things into be first in that new era. And remember, they also set up their own social media network based off of this it was
called My Rawkus. I remember even Jin was on there commenting on everything, and he was a fan of it. Yeah, right.
And so they were trying to really be first and do some groundbreaking stuff in this shift away from CDs and traditional music business artist signing and do this. So it was a really ambitious type of project. So, and
yeah, for sure.
I was on two different projects on that. So I was on
mine.
I was on yours. I also had production on yours, and then I was on 2 songs on 12 Bits release as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it was me. Yeah, I did features on there.
Right. I think the contract even talks about podcasting. Like, it was really ahead of its time about how they were trying to adjust to this new world, because the music industry kind of drastically changed very quickly. Right. I mean, you kind of saw it building up to it with like Napster and things like that. But all of a sudden, we're in a spot where albums weren't selling the way they were in physical media. And you had to move to digital, and you had to adjust and do something different. And this was really one of the first attempts to do that, I think, to say, look, we're going to put out 50 albums and it's going to be all digital releases. Like, you guys can still sell your CDs and make money. That's cool. But what the labels are going to do is they're going to market these digitally and kind of move to this new model.
Right. And at that time, digital distribution wasn't difficult to get, but it wasn't as many options as there are today. Right. I think at that time, it was basically CD Baby, and some label that might be affiliated with the Orchard at the time. And then a different step above that would be if you were going with what was not Baby Grand, what was the independent, the big independent label at the time? Koch. Yeah. So, but with Koch, you had to come up with a budget of several thousand to say that this is what we're going to spend on marketing before you could get that deal. So it was it wasn't like today where people could just go to DistroKid and be like, I'm going to put my own out.
I think Koch, though, has some similarities to Rawkus in that they were an independent label with major distribution. People forget, Rawkus obviously was priding itself on being more underground in its aesthetic, but it was funded by big money and it had that major Sony distribution, right? And so that's how you were able to get albums like Black on Both Sides by Mos Def and Quality by Talib Kweli. Even Big L's album posthumously went gold. You had some major releases from this so-called indie underground label. Right.
So, yeah, no, I think it was a good effort, a good endeavor. And it was good being a part of it as well.
The only thing in the contract that, I knew about it also, but that I was like, ooh, when I read it again, kind of hurts, was that they got your social media password and they were able to log into your social media. In the contract, it specifies they'll only do that to put analytics, like a bug on your profile, to track your traffic and I guess your hits, because they were going to put the the Rawkus playlist on there. They wanted to see where the hits were coming from, things like that. I think they said they were going to post, because this is like more in the MySpace days, they were going to post bulletins advertising Rawkus 50. The thing is, I don't think they ever did that, or if they did, I don't recall them doing it. I remember it being part of the deal that they were able to, but I don't remember them actually going into my social media and doing things.
You see, and I can understand the idea behind that. And that's kind of the idea behind what is it? Thunderclap. So where you want to do a marketing push and then be like, okay, well, this is what we're going to market if you want to be a part of it, and you get like say 100 people that sign on, and then whoever's doing that marketing, that promo, they can put the message in one place, and it automatically sends it out from 100 different accounts or whoever signed up, and then you've got like this possibility for it to either start to trend or go viral because it's all going out at the same time.
That was the idea, right? With the Rawkus 50, we're going to take 50 artists and they all have a bit of a buzz. They're doing their thing. They have got a big MySpace following, whatever it is. And if all 50 of them are blasting out all this Rawkus info at once, it's going to go national, right? Because they all are kind of holding down their own pocket of the country, let's say.
In some ways, I think the Rawkus 50 idea might work better now than then. Because like you said, you had MySpace then. Twitter might have been still kind of new. Instagram wasn't around yet. There was no TikTok yet. Like there weren't a lot of social media outlets at the time, and it wasn't as integrated into like it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today. Right. Yeah. Like today, if they're like, okay, every artist has to put their socials in so we can do this, like anytime to put a blast, like for you example, they'd get a blast would go out on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Well, we don't do MySpace anymore, but so if you just got those 4 and then all 50 have 4, you know what I mean? Now you're talking about 200 messages at once.
But the difference, though, I think, is that the fact that it's more ubiquitous now means people are less plugged into it in some ways than they were then, because it's everywhere. So it's hard to kind of cut through that noise. Whereas back then, like on MySpace, if I had 50,000 followers and I put out a bulletin, first of all, my followers were people who were into my music for the most part, because I was carefully picking who I was putting on my page. And so I think that was a much more concentrated audience of people who would be into it. Whereas now, like everything is just on social media all the time. So it's just kind of hard to stand out. Yeah.
I'm just thinking from the possibility of things starting to trend, because some things it seems like trending. I mean, just 100 or 200 posts on one topic can kind of push things to trend in certain areas. And so if you've got 50 artists and let's say they blast out one message from 50 different artists, or 3 messages from 50 different artists in like within an hour, all with the same hashtag, then you could potentially get it to trend in various areas pretty quickly. So what you're saying is the Nuance 50 is coming soon. Nuance 50. Oh, my God. We could do it with podcasts, right? Let's get 50 podcasts to all blast out. Right. Well, that's the idea, I guess, behind podcast networks to some degree, but they just don't do collaborative marketing like that. Right. And we had to end up doing our own show. We mentioned it a few minutes ago. One of the shows that we did became somewhat of a Rawkus showcase. And that was in a contract also. And that was a thing that was a little frustrating for me at the time. It says in the contract that you as an artist will be able to perform in select showcases, but they made it clear that not every artist would be able to be in every showcase that they were doing. And so then you had to compete essentially with the other 49 artists to try to get attention from the label or from whoever was putting these shows together. And that became difficult. And we had to do like even publicity stunts. Remember one time we brought a pizza to the office and we put it on video and it became a thing. And then that got like the founder of the label to finally acknowledge what we were doing. Remember they put in like one of these Rawkus emails. And I think we were trying to get the label to come to the show that we were doing. And if and they kind of weren't giving us any love until we kind of went out of our way to kind of make sure that they saw it. But there was that aspect of it. But I remember we just ended up saying, all right, we're going to put our own show together and invite some of the other Rawkus artists and make it one of these Rawkus showcases. And they're not going to do one for us. We're going to do our own. Right. And we were doing, yearly shows at the time, like collaborative ones where it'd be us and different artists. So so it was good. So it was it's a good find. Yeah, definitely. It's always something that to me feels like gives me credibility in hip hop, because you're talking about the label that had some classic releases and really changed the course of music in some ways. And I've got a song I'm putting out soon talking about that. But, it's an honor to be just associated on any level with the label that put out artists like Mos Def and Quality and Big L and Pharoah Monch, even early Eminem stuff, Cool G Rap. That was
especially at that time, that was seen as the alternative to that more blatantly mainstream, some would say sellout attempts that you hear on the radio all the time. This was like, this is hip hop that's more authentic, but also is palatable and is not just something that only like nerds listen to in their basement, something that could actually make a splash too, but has that more real foundation behind it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, that's dope. And I just, maybe I'm not in the loop as much anymore, but I don't think there are a lot of labels like that around anymore.
There aren't many labels, period, around anymore. Everything is more do it yourself. And I think now,
Yeah,
especially if you want to carry that flag of being that authentic, independent minded person, you're much more likely to just say, I'm not going to have any label. I'm just going to go out, right, and do it myself, which is certainly very valid. But I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. You just got to find what works for you. Right.
Absolutely. So, yeah, that's really dope. And shout out to C-Rock the Fury. He's another alum of that time, because he was the one I did the collab with on the tracks on 12 Bits album. Okay. Yeah, we did two joints. Yeah. I think he had a third on there. So yeah, he was all over that album. That was a producer, right? 12-Bit was a producer, right? So he did a producer's album. And so yeah, we cut two. Fury and I did two songs together, and I think he might have done one solo. He recorded them all at my spot, but yeah. Okay. So good times. Good times. Speaking of good times, I don't know. I guess we'll have to decide on this one. The New York State Legislature is trying to wrap up the session for the year, and both houses now passed a bill that would make it easier to help clear people who might have been wrongfully convicted in a criminal case. Now, this really deals with people who pled guilty. So if you plead guilty to a criminal charge, it's hard under New York law now to have that overturned, because you are essentially going into court and swearing that you're guilty of the crime, right? So how are you going to get that appealed or turned over? But nonetheless, there is still room now in the current law to do so under narrow circumstances. It really relates to DNA evidence, right? If DNA evidence comes to light that wasn't available before, showing that you were innocent, then you could have your case revisited, even if you pled guilty. Well, this new bill, if signed, would become law to allow people to get their convictions overturned under broader circumstances, right? When new evidence comes in, doesn't have to be DNA necessarily. You would be able to go back into court under certain scenarios and have your case overturned. Some controversy here. Let's see, the Innocence Project was the nonprofit organization that was really fighting hard to get this passed. But then you have, say it again? I said they've been around a long time. Yeah. Then you've got an organization, the District Attorneys Association, which represents county level prosecutors across the state. They sent a letter to the Speaker of the Assembly saying this would be a bad idea. They're saying it would be an entirely unnecessary fix, that it's something that is not broken. The bill would overwhelm the criminal justice system at a time when the next straw might be the one that breaks its back. The bill would eliminate finality in criminal convictions in the state to the detriment of all New Yorkers. So that's their take on it. I disagree with that. It hasn't been signed by the governor yet, so it's not law yet, but it is on her desk. And yeah, the question is, do we think it's a good idea? I think it's a good idea. And I disagree with their take on it. I think we have to, even though, like you said, it's if you plead guilty, then you're essentially going back and trying to say, well, I kind of lied at this point. So I can understand how that's difficult to revisit if you've pled guilty, but we cannot dismiss how many guilty pleas come in because of coercion, because of certain circumstances, because of, being scared that it's going to be worse or something of that degree. I think what we should be trying to do is trying to make sure that innocent people don't go into prison at any means possible, even if that means overturning conviction. Now, my cynical side will say the reason why the prosecutors opposing it is more out of ego and record than out of thinking about the justice system, more thinking like, okay, if this gets overturned, then that's one less feather in my cap for a conviction that I just got. And that's bad for my career. And that could be, to be fair, there could be other circumstances that they're taking into consideration that I have no idea about. But as I said, my cynical side, that's what I hear when I hear that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of it, but it might not all be about the feather in the cap as much as them putting the work to get this conviction and thinking now that they're all just going to be appealed and basically all the work is going to be undermined. And, maybe they think that it'll be appealed too much, right? And if they have the opportunity to appeal under broader circumstances, more people will just be appealing. Not that that the conviction should be overturned, but they keep going for it now, and it's going to kind of undermine the work that they did and that finality that they sought. But I agree with you that it shouldn't be about whether the DA wants or needs finality. It should be about getting to the correct outcome, right? And if the person truly is innocent, then we should be concerned about that above anything else. Absolutely.
That should be the number one point. And I think it comes back to some of the questions that we've raised before on things like, justice and on punishment versus, certain outcomes. If people are guilty and they're definitely guilty, yes, they should serve their time, but we shouldn't be trying to get, we should be trying to make sure that innocent people don't go to prison regardless of whose career it was or whatever the circumstances was. If they're innocent, they should be able to be let out.
So it does, though, raise an interesting point about pleading guilty, and you mentioned it. When you plead guilty, you are saying to the court that you are guilty, right? That you did the crime. We know that a lot of people plead guilty just because they don't want to go through the process. Sometimes the prosecutors will say, listen, we'll give you a deal if you plead guilty, right? Maybe you won't do any jail time at all. Or maybe it'll be a lesser sentence. Whereas if you fight this and you go to trial and you lose, then you'll be in there for a very long time. That happens a lot. And some people don't want to take that risk. You also have people who just want to get it over with. Maybe they can't afford to fight it. Maybe they don't think they got, good lawyers. They can't afford a good lawyer, whatever. And they just want to get this over with as quickly as possible. They think that their back is to the wall, and they think that pleading guilty pragmatically for them is the best decision, even if maybe they didn't commit the crime. But it's hard, I think, for a lot of people who have that mindset of, listen, I'm innocent, I don't commit crimes. If I was accused of something falsely, I would never plead guilty, right? A lot of people say that. They say, you can throw me in jail for 1,000 years, you can kill me. I'm not admitting to something I didn't do. But I think until you're in that situation, it's kind of hard to speak on what people do.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on it because, like you said, they could have cases where they're like, okay, well, we're going to offer you this deal. You take this, maybe you're in for 6 months, maybe you're in for a year. But if you don't take the deal and you go to court, we're going to push for the maximum and we're going to try to make sure you never come out. And so now you're faced, my God, this is, this could, even though I didn't do it, like I might have to weigh my options here on what's going to be the best outcome for me, but in the future.
Yeah, and you look at stats like once prosecutors bring a case to trial, they almost always get a conviction. And, you're like, listen, basically the game is rigged at this point. You feel like, let me just take whatever outcome is going to be the least amount of harm to me. So that happens. And I've known people who were faced with things like that, even, when it comes to their job and their employment prospects. It was like, we can't keep associating with you while this is hanging over your head. But if you plead guilty to a lesser crime, all right, fine, it's over. We can all move on from it. But if you're going to be going to trial for this big felony case, then we can't mess with you anymore. So even if you come out winning the case at the end, you might have lost your job and your reputation and everything. And we know now that just being in the headlines, right, just having a headline about you, accusing you of something is often enough to kill your reputation. Even if you end up going to court and winning, it doesn't matter. A year from now, 2 years from now, people will just remember that headline. Hey, weren't you the guy who, and so people think about that. Like, listen, my reputation is doomed anyway at this point. Let me just try to find the least bad outcome, right? In this. But I was going to say, speaking of people getting deals by prosecutors, Hunter Biden, and I don't want to talk much about this because this wasn't a topic that we had planned, but I just saw in the headlines apparently Hunter Biden is taking a deal to avoid jail time, it seems, by admitting to some lesser tax crimes and I think a gun charge. So
there was some fire where the conservatives claim smoke. Is that what we're hearing?
It seems like Hunter Biden is poised to plead guilty to some kind of offense to avoid the possibility of jail time. And again,
that could be key, to avoid the possibility.
Exactly. So that's the deal, right? They say, listen, if you say that you're guilty of these things, maybe you'll get probation, a slap on the wrist, a fine, whatever it is, but you won't have to do time. And so some people weren't faced with that, say, I'm going to plead guilty. But it's hard to overlook the fact that you are making a statement before the court, right?
Right.
You're guilty. So how do you square that? I mean, it's like you said, you're basically coming back now and saying, well, I lied to the court when I said I was guilty, and now I want to overturn my conviction. Some people might have a hard time with that aspect of it.
Yeah, but I think, to me, it sounds like this proposal is a good thing. I mean, because like I said, it can be a complicated situation, and some people are going to have to choose or feel like they have to choose the path of least resistance in order to get on with their life, or to still have a life. I mean, we just saw, what was it, the Central Park Five? Yeah, how they were coerced into pleading guilty, and one of them spent decades behind bars under the most horrendous conditions. But they were told in the police precinct that if you just say that you did it, then you can go home tonight. And
should that be part of it then? I mean, because this is nuance, I mean, should we unpack that part of it more? Should that be part of, and it might be hard to prove and everything, but if you're giving people a chance who pled guilty to get a second shot, should coercion be a piece of it? Like, should you say, okay, we're only going to allow that if you didn't really mean to plead guilty in the first place, if you were coerced into it, if it's under duress? Or is that going to be presumed in a case where you can show that you were innocent? Or are we going to presume that you didn't really mean to plead guilty, because why would you otherwise?
I think with this idea of it having more broader applications, I think that can come into play. I think it just allows for different things like that, right? So it could be allowing for potential of a coercion situation. It could be allowing for a situation where, like we just discussed, where a prosecutor could say, I'll give you this deal, otherwise I'm going to try to bury you under the jail. And like, it allows for these different things that are really complicated to have to deal with in the moment, that you have no control over. And like you said, it feels like the system's rigged at that point. I think whatever can allow for keeping innocent people out of jail, we should be up for.
So then I wonder, and just kind of throwing ideas out here, if we should change our understanding of pleading guilty, because I don't do criminal law, I do civil law. And in the civil context, if you are suing somebody or threatening to sue someone over whatever cause of action, and they have their defenses, it's going to be a whole big thing. Oftentimes you'll have settlement negotiations, right? And you'll say, okay, we're going to drop the lawsuit, or we're going to drop certain claims if you agree to this. And it's kind of a deal that you work out. Almost always in the settlement agreement, you're saying that just because someone might pay you the money or do something that you agree to, it doesn't mean that they're admitting liability, right? It's just an agreement that you guys worked out to avoid the lawsuits and the whole show.
Right. And the rest of this process and everything.
Yeah, we're just going to get it over with now. We don't want to wait 3 years to work this out. We want to just work something out now, because, let's say my client didn't do the thing that they're being accused of, but they know that this civil lawsuit is going to take 3 to 5 years, and they got to pay attorney's fees defending it. By the time they get through that process, it'll be 5 years later, and they'll have spent more money than if they just paid the person right now a little bit to make them go away. Unfortunately, that's kind of how the system is. So you always see in these settlement agreements, just because I'm doing this doesn't mean that I'm admitting liability. I'm just doing it for the sake of the settlement. I wonder if a similar approach could be used in the criminal context, where someone says, I'm not really admitting that I did the crime. I'm just willing to take this punishment offered me because I don't want to go through the process.
Right. And I think, to me, it kind of sounds like this proposal kind of allows for some sort of, allows for that to some degree, right? Because you can walk back some things and basically say, well, this is what happened at that time. But maybe there should be something up front that says, like, a different type of plea.
It's just hard for me as a lawyer to fully get on board with this concept of pleading guilty, saying that, yes, I swear before the court that I did this, I'm guilty of this, and then appealing later on. I mean, because there's also something in the law called unclean hands, which is if you came to the court with unclean hands, right? If you did something unscrupulous, if you lied to the court, if you did something that was against the law in relation to these proceedings, you cannot then ask the court for help and get relief in relation to the same proceedings when you don't have clean hands with regard to this case in the first place. You know what I mean? So it's kind of similar in that sense. Like, how are you going to ask the court for help after you already swore to the court that you were guilty?
I think shouldn't there be an allowance though if we're talking about their innocence and the potential for consequences, like you just discussed, like maybe it's financial, maybe it's coercion, maybe it's
right.
Life. Like there should be some kind of allowance for that. I think just in this idea of being fairer in our justice system. It's an
acknowledgement of the way the justice system actually works versus how it was intended or how it is on paper, right?
How we would think it would be.
Right. Well, no, because on paper, the way the system is set up, you don't plead guilty unless you're guilty, right? That's how it's supposed to be. But we know in practice that doesn't always happen. It oftentimes doesn't happen that way. And so that's why we're faced with having to pass a bill like this now to try to adjust or correct some of it. But the system, I think, still is fundamentally flawed in that we know that when someone pleads guilty to the court, it doesn't necessarily mean that they committed the crime. Maybe we should have an allowance for that. Maybe people should be able to say, I'm willing to take the punishment because I don't want to go through the trial and face the consequences. If they offer me a better deal, if I just do this probation or whatever, I'm going to take it. Doesn't mean that I'm guilty. But, the way the system is set up, in order to get that prize, if you want to call it that they're dangling in front of your face, you have to admit that you did it. And really, part of that, I think, is designed to prevent you from trying to appeal and fight it. Basically, that is supposed to be finality. It's supposed to be, all right, no games. We're not going to fight this anymore. I'm just going to take this. And now it's done. Right. I think that's why the prosecutors are pushing back a little bit also, because they don't want to have it not be done after offering them that in exchange for it being done. Right.
I like I said, I think it should be allowable. And I think your idea, maybe there should be another plea. I mean, there's guilty, not guilty. It's no contest.
No contest. Yeah.
No contest. First time offenders, you got the DAG plea. But maybe there should be another one.
The thing is, if you're accepting the punishment now, that usually is that almost always is a deal, right? We're gonna give you this break from hard time if you will say that you're guilty.
Right. So maybe there should be a plea that says, look, I'm not admitting guilt, nor I'm maintaining my innocence, but I'm willing to accept punishment because of extenuating circumstances or something.
The problem is that the prosecutors aren't offering that as part of the deal, right?
Right. Because, again, my cynical side, they want that feather in their cap. They want that mark on their record that says, I got this conviction because it helps my career and it helps my ego. But that could be, that's just my cynical.
I mean, but it's a negotiation also. They're both trying to get something.
Yeah. And I just have kind of a problem with that. It really shouldn't be. Like the main goal should be that we're actually looking for truth. We're not looking for a negotiation to get whether I can get someone in jail, whether I can get a conviction or not. Like, are they honestly guilty or not? Even if my case falls apart, if they're honestly innocent, that should be okay. And it shouldn't be a mark against the prosecutor.
Right.
If during the course of this case, the prosecutor is looking for evidence for guilt, the opposing side is looking for evidence to support innocence. If during the course, either side finds out that, okay, there's not enough here for guilty, then they should be able to just let it go. Get the person out of there so we don't put an innocent person behind bars. And everyone should be okay with that.
They're supposed to do that, right? If there is exculpatory evidence, they're supposed to hand it over. If the case falls apart, they're not supposed to pursue it anymore.
And it shouldn't be, to me, it shouldn't be a mark on the prosecutors. And I think, I'm sounding a little cynical against prosecutors, but I think there's also some pressure on them to perform and to get convictions at any means, at all costs, right? And so they've got that pressure to deal with on their side, and that shouldn't be there either, right? So, and I think
it seems even a systemic issue.
Right. It's a systemic, and I think even more broad should be for people who are actually already in jail that are found innocent. And that's one thing that's always irked me, is that people that are incarcerated and then say evidence comes up that proves their innocence, they're not immediately let go. They still have processes that have to go on, that they could be still sitting.
Yeah, you can't be immediately let go. You still have to follow a process, right? I mean, just because you see something on TV or something, you still have to prove it before a court.
No, but if they have that information that says, okay, well, this person is definitely innocent and they're behind bars, they should open that key in that door immediately, because otherwise you got an innocent person sitting there until that process plays out, even though you've already got the...
Who decides that the person was proven innocent?
I don't know, DNA evidence or whatever evidence comes up.
You still have a hearing, you still have to review it, right? You can't just say, this just proves it. I mean, there still has to be a process in place.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you got that person sitting there, even though you've got the proof that they're not supposed to be there. That irks me. You know, I understand I understand that it's not. It can be a complicated issue, but just the fact that someone sits there, because you can't get that time back.
Right.
So
but you also bring up a good point about people who didn't plead guilty. Let's say that they went to trial, they maintained their innocence the whole time,
right,
and they were convicted, right. Then new evidence were to come up years later or whenever, showing that they truly were innocent. Well, now you don't have the problem of them ever pleading guilty in court, right? So what is the hold up here? Right.
And that's always been my question. And even cases where they're like, oh, well, you can't submit new evidence or you can't do that. Like, they should always be able to. And I understand you want some cases to be closed so it's not such a backlog in the court system, but the idea of someone being innocent and still being locked up is just very disheartening and infuriating.
Absolutely. But you also have to realize that in prison, everyone is innocent, right? They're all going to say that they're innocent.
Sure.
So, the laws have to be made in such a way that they're not abused, because it's not only going to be used by people who truly are innocent. Everyone is going to try to get overturned. And so that needs to be kept in mind too.
But yeah, absolutely. But that's where, you got to have evidence, that bears out that. So, but I support it. I think it's a good idea.
Well, yeah, and I do too, because the way the current system is it allows for DNA evidence to come in later on to potentially overturn a conviction, even if the person pled guilty. Well, why is DNA evidence any different from any other exculpatory evidence? I mean, I understand the idea that maybe it's more conclusive or it's stronger proof, but you're still allowing people who pled guilty to bring in new evidence. So why limit it to just one type of evidence?
Yeah. It's a good point. It's a good question. I mean,
sometimes, I know people think DNA is like the end all be all, but sometimes you might have evidence that's even stronger than DNA in a particular case.
So, well, for my part, I hope it goes through. I hope it gets on the books. Anything that potentially helps keep innocent people out of incarceration, I'm for that.
All right. Well, we can talk about the poll question. Unfortunately, I was not able to get the poll up on Reddit. Apparently, the poll subreddit was removed. At first, I thought we were banned, but I don't think so. I think it's just down for whatever reason.
So they're probably one of the subreddits that went dark.
Okay.
And so what it is, Reddit's been going through a big change where the owners of Reddit, or the leadership of Reddit, has proposed that they're going to start charging for, I think, because they're third-party clients that access Reddit. And up until now, they've been able to access it free. And some ways, using these clients gets around ads that Reddit uses to make money. And I think one of the changes they're making is that they're going to start charging third-party clients a small fee for using their API. And so people are kind of upset about that. And there's some other things they're upset about. And so in protest, there's a massive amount, it's like 5,000 subreddits decided to go dark and make them all private so no one can access them, which in a way hurts Reddit, because there's not the revenue from that. Plus, there's a spike in traffic on the other Reddits that are up still, which has crashed several servers. So Reddit crashed several times over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, you ran into a protest.
Gotcha. At first, I thought they're banning us. They're like our poll questions, but no. So we do have that poll question outstanding, and I guess it relates to this topic as well, right? About criminal convictions being overturned
Right.
after a certain number of years. We could make a new poll question on this. I guess we could have two questions out there, unless we have results. I mean, did you get results on the last poll?
Actually, we did get some. We did pretty well. The views on that last poll question. Let me pull it up here. There was. This was on the criminal convictions. Should criminal convictions be sealed after a certain number of years? And we got about 1,500 views on there. And one of the comments says that that really depends on the crime and the criminal. Someone said, if I were a parent of a teenage girl, I wouldn't want Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I wouldn't want her records to be sealed. And they also said that it should be
part of the exceptions, right? I think sexual
Right.
crimes and murder was not part of this, so they still would not be sealed.
Right. And another comment was saying it should be for lower level crimes. They think white collar financial crimes should not be sealed. Like Bernie Madoff hurt a lot of people. The public should be warned about people like him.
It's so high profile like that. You can seal and unseal, you can do whatever you want. People still gonna know about it.
That's true too. And then another comment was saying just flat out no.
Well, and I think we need to acknowledge that right now there is a mood really nationwide towards making sure people are convicted. I think there's a lot of concern that not enough conviction is happening. Crime is running rampant, and they think that because of things like bail reform, we hear that all the time, right? There isn't enough of an effort to lock people up who should be locked up. And so when efforts are brought forward, which might be good, but they might have merit on their own, but in the context of we're in this crime-ridden society, we need to do more about crime. I think sometimes people push back against these efforts to give more rights to people that they think shouldn't have them, right? People who are criminals, in this case, people who were convicted of criminal offenses. They're thinking, why are we even entertaining this? But it's like they look at it like the focus is in the wrong place.
Yeah. And
I think you should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
And I also think that improving the criminal justice system is better for everyone. I mean, I think it serves that purpose well, getting people convicted who should be convicted. I mean, I think that should be the focus, right? So let's say we're going to make an effort to ensure that innocent people are not convicted so that we're really putting our resources into locking up those who really should be locked up.
Right. And I think that's key there. People that should be versus just, whoever we can get. And again, it brings that focus of what about punishment? Is there punishment or is there actually rehabilitation? Is there, are you paying your debt to society? And why are you still supposed to keep paying that? I think kind of in a way, isn't this kind of similar to in the 80s when they put all of those harsh, or was it 80s or early 90s, where they put those harsh sentencing rules in place with the 3 strikes and all of that stuff, because it was like crime is running rampant. We've got to punish. And then they did away with a lot of the rehabilitation programs. Right. It was just more all about let's just punish and get as many people locked up as possible.
Yeah, you had in the 80s under Reagan, the whole war on drugs thing. And it kind of really escalated into the 90s with, I think 94 was that crime bill.
Bill with Clinton.
Federal sentencing a lot harsher. So yeah, that was definitely the trend back then. And I think there's an appetite for that kind of thing.
Right.
We should learn from the mistakes of history. We can be tough on crime that we need to be tough on while not overstepping, right? Because we still need to protect constitutional rights. And we need to make sure that people who are innocent have a chance to prove that they're innocent.
Right. And we should be leading with compassion. We criticize countries like China and Russia and these other places, yet we incarcerate far more of our own people than they do of theirs. We have the most incarcerated people of any country on the planet. And, it doesn't quite fit our marketing material. Like if that's what we're pushing out in marketing, like who are we to judge others if we're going to be the worst offenders?
Right. All right. So with that being said, we can do a new poll question based on this last topic.
I think that's the one we just talked about. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. So the poll question of the week is, do you believe that people who pled guilty to criminal offenses should have the opportunity to introduce new evidence to overturn their convictions?
Good. Yeah, it's a good question there. We'll see. We'll see what people say. I'm predicting there's going to be a lot of no.
With no explanation, just no.
Just no. I mean, because it is a complicated topic, and without some background on it, you're like, wait a minute, but they said guilty. Like, well, of course they should be.
But it depends, though, I think, on whether you focus on pleading guilty or just the guilty part. Because if you're found guilty, that's one thing, right? But pleading guilty, some people might not really internalize what that implies, what that means, So I think it depends on how people hear the question too. It kind of, not to make light of the situation. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, if you're in a relationship with someone, it's like, oh, well, you just said one thing and now you're saying you want to prove that the other thing happened, but you already said one thing happened. You drive me crazy here,
Right. Yeah. So.
All right. Well, speaking of prosecutions, we wanted to mention this Daniel Penny.
Yes.
We talked about this on the show back when it happened, the chokehold death in the New York City subway. Jordan Neely, of course, was killed by this chokehold employed by Daniel Penny, and he was, following protest, indicted on manslaughter charges, right?
Right. Yeah, we actually got recent comments on the poll question that we put out for that like a couple of days ago. With a guy saying that his issue was that anyone even mildly training in grappling like he was knows how long it takes a person to be rendered unconscious and how long it can take to cause brain damage or kill someone.
Yeah. And that's the part that I don't understand. And actually, I responded to a New York City council member who was trying to give this guy credit. I think she actually participated in some kind of demonstration in favor of him, right? In his defense. And I said, I don't understand how you could defend someone who was a trained Marine. And she acknowledges this, trained Marine. They keep saying that like, that's a great thing about him. Well, okay, so you're acknowledging he's a trained Marine. How could you not expect a trained Marine to be able to release a chokehold before someone dies? I don't understand that part of it. No one has given me an answer for why that's okay. I mean, I understand this idea of he's causing some kind of disturbance in the subway. People were scared. They wanted to restrain him, whatever. Why did you have to choke him until he died? No one is answering that who's defending him.
Right. Absolutely. 15 minutes. That's yeah. I mean, reiterating that he was a trained Marine only raises that question even more because better. It's like, that's like Mike Tyson going and getting into a street fight. Like, just like boxers going into, or MMA fighters going and get into street fights. You're professionally trained. You know what you can do. You know what kind of damage you can cause. You know what kind of moves can take out, especially untrained people. Yeah. You're going to be held to a higher responsibility.
And it was crickets, right? I even asked the council member this. Crickets, no response.
Yeah, because it's racism. I'm gonna say it's racism. I know people might push back on that, but it's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, be able to answer. I see people commenting on social media. Oh, we need more trained Marines out there watching over the subways. And someone else posted a thing. I think it was the Guardian Angels back in the 70s or 80s saying you wouldn't call it vigilanteism if you rode the subways, and try to make people like those heroes. That was the Bernie Getz situation and everything. I just don't understand that piece of it. Choking someone for 15 minutes, how can you explain that? And he was trained, like you said, trained in combat, right? Hand-to-hand combat. How do you not know to release a chokehold?
Right.
And do you think that you have the right to kill someone? I mean, is that what we're saying? That murdering someone, or let's be fair, I just say taking someone's life in a situation, is that justified given the circumstances? Was it self-defense or defense of others such that it warranted deadly force? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. So,
well,
interesting.
We did want to talk about, I guess, the distinction now between manslaughter and murder charges. Some people say, why is it just manslaughter?
Right. Well, I don't think there's a very clear understanding in the public of the different charges we hear on TV and in movies. Oh yeah, manslaughter or murder one or murder second degree. Like, I don't think the public has a real clear understanding of what that means. Like, is murder one more egregious than murder two?
Yes.
Or is it the other way around? Like
No.
sometimes, or is manslaughter more than like what's the difference?
Right. You would think
Mans-
manslaughter sounds worse on its face, right? You're slaughtering a man.
right.
You didn't just kill him, you slaughtered that man.
Yeah.
But no, manslaughter is a lesser charge. It does get confusing because New York actually does a lot of this different from most other states. And I was telling you on the pre-show here before we went live that when you take the bar exam, you take the multi-state portion, which is the general rules that are prevalent throughout the country but aren't state specific, right? So you'll have questions about murder and different degrees and what they mean and all, but that's different from New York. You take a New York specific exam as part of the bar and you are tested only on New York law, and the New York law often conflicts with the multi-state law that you were just doing the other day, and so that gets really rough. And in New York in particular, murder one is different from most other parts of the country. Murder in the first degree in New York is what other states would call murder one plus an aggravating factor. Like if you were to kill a judge or a cop or I think a witness, I think an act of terrorism, there are certain factors that elevate it from murder two to murder one. So murder in the second degree in New York is what most states would call murder in the first degree, which is the intentional killing of somebody else, right? So, if you just go out, your typical murder case that you think of, someone goes out there with a gun and shoots someone on purpose to kill them. In New York, that's considered murder two, believe it or not, murder in the second degree, unless there is an aggravating circumstance, right? Did you kill a judge? Did you kill a witness who's going to testify against you? Did you kill a cop? That makes it murder one. So there's that distinction. But when you get into manslaughter, the way I tend to think of this is there are two categories of manslaughter, voluntary and involuntary. Involuntary manslaughter is negligence, right? Like you didn't mean to do it, but you did something that you shouldn't have done, and it resulted in someone dying. I think a good example of this is drunk driving, right? That's often you often get involuntary manslaughter if you end up killing someone while you were drunk driving. You didn't intend to kill them, but you were negligent in driving that vehicle while you were drunk, and that's a foreseeable circumstance of your actions, right? It was known in advance that if you did this thing, that could end up happening. And so that thing did end up happening, and now you're charged with involuntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is you did intend to kill a person, so it is like murder, except there are circumstances that are mitigating. So as opposed to the aggravating circumstance, like we said, murder one in New York, there are certain mitigating circumstances. And the classic example you hear about in law school is you catch your wife in bed with somebody else. So you kill them, you meant to kill them, but you were so enraged at the time, and it was kind of understood that you would be so enraged. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not a complete excuse. You're not getting off completely, but we're saying it's not quite as bad as if that situation wasn't there, right? Like it's like,
it wasn't like premeditated.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's not so much whether it's premeditated, but it's that you're somewhat not justified, but understood that you're just in that rage, or you're in that environment where you just kill the person because you're not just mad, but anyone would be mad like that. Anyone would be in a murderous rage if they experienced what you just experienced. That's kind of the way people understand voluntary manslaughter. The OJ case, believe it or not, would be a good example of that. If you read his book, If I Did It, I think it was called, he explains,
if I did it, this is how I would have done it.
I would have done it. And he goes in great detail about what he experienced. And quite honestly, if you take what he wrote in that book as true, if you assume that that's actually what really did happen, that would be a good case for voluntary manslaughter, because he describes kind of how like an out of body experience, just being so mad by seeing Nicole with this other guy. And then there's still this idea, well, was she really with the other guy? And was he really justified? So there are still questions there. But if you kind of take it at face value that this guy is just so enraged to catch someone in bed, I don't even know, there are questions about whether they're still married, but were they married, were they separated? I don't even remember. But
I don't even.
whatever the situation was, but just generally speaking, right? That's kind of like the flavor of what you would see for voluntary manslaughter, where you didn't mean to kill the person. It wasn't like it was an accident. You meant to do it, but you just weren't in your right mind. And
Right.
your average person would be the same as you under the circumstance. It wasn't just like you're uniquely crazy, right? Like anyone would be driven crazy under that.
Right, right.
So that's kind of, the two flavors of manslaughter. So in this case, he is being charged with manslaughter. And we've got here in New York now, manslaughter in the first degree. There are a couple, that's actually 4 classifications of manslaughter in the first degree. But believe it or not, one of them is you perform an abortion on a woman who is more than 24 weeks pregnant and the woman dies. That's interesting. You engage in activity that puts a child who is less than 11 years old at substantial risk of serious physical injury and the child dies.
Wait, in that first one though, would that not be involuntary manslaughter? Because he didn't intend to kill the woman through the abortion, but
this is just manslaughter in the first degree. So this is actually not necessarily voluntary or involuntary. Like here it says manslaughter cases involve recklessness, negligence, or heat of passion. Okay. So that would be a recklessness standard, which is really more the voluntary manslaughter.
Okay. Which Penny probably falls under the recklessness.
So right. So that's kind of one way to look at it. The involuntary manslaughter is negligence. Voluntary manslaughter is recklessness or even intentional, but that heat of passion factor, right? But you have different categories of manslaughter in the first degree under New York law, some which might be categorized as involuntary, some as voluntary. So another one is with intent to cause the death of another person, you cause the death of such person or a third party while acting under the influence of extreme emotional disturbance. That was like the OJ thing I was talking about. And then this one, which is probably what they're charging him under, with intent to cause serious physical injury to another person, you do in fact cause the death of that person.
So I suppose that's what's going to come out in the court is whether he intended to cause
physical injury, serious physical injury. But see, that's manslaughter in the first degree. There's manslaughter in the second degree. Let me pull this up because this might cover more of those involuntary situations that we were talking about. Well, this is second degree. You recklessly cause the death of another person. You perform an abortion on a woman and the woman dies, or you intentionally help someone commit suicide. So and again, New York classifies this a little bit differently as other states, but that's manslaughter in the second degree. So that will be you recklessly cause the death of another person. So that might end up being what this case is, right? Because the first degree is you intended serious physical injury and a person died. The second degree is you recklessly caused the death, meaning you knew in your mind that there was a substantial risk that this could happen, but you did it anyway.
Okay. So it sounds to me like at a very general level, the different classifications of the varying degrees of manslaughter going into the different degrees of murder is all about varying degrees of intent at a very basic level.
You could say that intent, or I would say seriousness. I mean, because there are various degrees of intent, even in manslaughter in the first degree, right? Like we said, there are certain components of this, certain elements that you might associate with involuntary, and certain components you might think as voluntary. And so even in in manslaughter 1, you have some, you intended to cause physical injury, or like we said, one is you perform an abortion who is, more than 24 weeks pregnant and a woman dies. Well, in that case, you didn't intend to kill anyone. So that was all involuntary, right? But I think it's more broken down in terms of the perceived seriousness of the offense.
Okay. So my question now is, after having watched or listened to this, how many law school credits are people entitled to? Like one, a half? Do they get can they apply a little bit of training to it?
Well, none, but I would say that I got to take my CLEs this year, and I wouldn't mind teaching some CLE credits at some point. That would be kind of fun.
Nice.
I wonder if I can get credit. I think I can. I'm not sure. Can I get credit for CLEs if I teach them?
I wonder.
I should, right? If I do a whole class?
Maybe. Although I think they're generally in any type of this recurring education is generally about learning something yourself. So maybe.
Right. Understood. But for me to teach a class like that, I will be doing a lot of research and a lot of learning.
That's true.
Probably a lot more than if I just took someone's class, right?
Yeah, that's true. So
I don't know. But either way, I would like to do a CLE at some point. Maybe I can do one on election law.
True.
So we have to see if Penny here ends up getting manslaughter 1 or 2. Like you said, did he intend to cause serious physical injury? Are they going to charge him with that and then maybe see if the second degree version sticks?
Right. So
There's also criminally negligent homicide, right? I mean, there are different offenses, different degrees, and different possibilities. Sometimes it's hard to know for certain what crime this exactly falls under. It could be a couple different ones.
Yeah, I think it's another one that's kind of murky as far as in the understanding is homicide versus murder. Like
well, homicide is a general term,
right,
for taking someone's life. So manslaughter is homicide, murder is homicide. It's all homicide,
right?
But criminally negligent homicide is its own crime in New York. And like I said, New York classifies these homicide offenses differently from how most of the country understands them. Let's see. Criminally negligent homicide is a Class E felony. Causing the death of another person off of negligence. That's what most of the country would understand to be typical involuntary manslaughter, right? Causing the death of another person through negligence. But
right.
The particular offense is called criminally negligent homicide in New York.
Well, we're going to see. I'm sure that case is going to be followed quite closely. So,
yeah. So,
right.
Good discussion as always.
I think so. It seems like Shiva got held up.
Yeah.
We'll see her next week.
I wanted to ask her how that forum went that she moderated. She was moderating,
right?
I think, of the mayoral candidates in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah. Well, hopefully things went well for her.
Yeah.
And as they went well here, the discussion, if you are interested in what we talked about, want to leave some comments, take part in, you can stop off at YouTube and at Instagram on Nuance Show. And cannot forget, we need a bottom line. So how about bottom line there, Mike?
Need a bottom line. Let's see. To tie some of what we talked about together, I think the bottom line is we do need to take the criminal justice system seriously and make reforms where appropriate. And that includes doing what we can to keep innocent people out of prison and out of jail, while also giving us enough resources then to appropriately go after those who deserve to be locked up and should be off our streets.
I think that's a good one. And I think the key to that is to, as we've talked about before, is basically just continue to refine the system, because the idea should be that we don't want to put innocent people behind bars. We want to have that kind of protection for the innocent. We want to lead with compassion in that regard. At the same time, get justice done and get people, locked up that should be locked up. So I think, that's good bottom line. Continuous improvement. That's
right. The more perfect union.
Yes. That should be a t-shirt. Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's get some Nuance t-shirts made.
In order to form a more perfect, or just more perfect union or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to me, it's one of my favorite phrases from those documents, is because it shows like I don't know,
awareness.
Yeah, or a hope, or just striving to be better. It's like we don't know everything now,
right?
But there's room to grow. There's always room for refinement. There's always, that striving to do better. And I think that's, to me, has always been something that was something I liked in those documents.
There's an optimism there, but
that's what I was looking for, an optimism, I guess.
Right, but it's not unfettered, right? There's
Right.
an awareness that we can always strive to do better, but we're never going to be perfect. But let's try
Right.
to get as close to it as possible.
Right. Yeah. So
good words.
sounds good.
Maybe that could be the tagline of the show. Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. A more perfect union. I like it. As always, we've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time.